Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help members of the military community thrive in their post-service career. Today is episode number 363, Drones and Data with Christian Sanz.
So then I just went to a construction site, a couple of sites, and went in. You know, the first one that I went into, I got kicked out because I went in with a t-shirt and flip-flops. And they're like, "What the hell are you doing here?" and so then I came back with, I remember I flew DPR or Skanska. From far away, I had placed a camera on the drone and I had these goggles where I can see everything. And I would go into the site from far away and fly it. But I remember they came back to me, they're like, "Hey, we told you not to come back here. What are you doing?" And so the superintendent at that time, he's like, hey, can you actually take another video, but from this angle? And I'm like, what? This is great.
I'm so honored to have had time with Christian today. I want to give a little bit of backstory that I give at the start of the interview, but I think it's worth recapping here. So, as many of you know, we were fortunate to receive financial sponsorship from the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. More on them in a second. But it allowed us to do a new series of interviews. And so as Steve Bain and I were talking about who we wanted to interview, I realized, we haven't talked to anyone in the drone industry. And I think it's an industry that has a lot of interest for veterans. It's growing rapidly. It's cool. It's high tech. And so I did a little bit of searching, and Steve sent me some articles, and we looked to find, who are people in this space who also served in the military. And I came across Christian. He was the only person I emailed, and I just sent a cold email explaining what I do with Beyond the Uniform and asking if he'd be willing to be on the show. And I just want to bring that up, first of all, to say, I was so energized and inspired by this conversation, and it all came about because of simply writing an email to another veteran. And I just want to bookmark that for all of you listening, because I think great things come when you get out of your head, when you get out of your comfort zone, when you get out of your office or home and talk to people new. And that's a major theme in today's interview. And Christian is a really brilliant man. I think that will come across in his advice to listeners. But he, in 1998, got out of the military, went into tech when tech was just, or the software programming, when that was just becoming a thing. And I think that you'll learn a lot from his story. Although it's one of entrepreneurship, it's one about the drone industry, it's really advice relevant to every career path, because his story demonstrates time and time again the value that comes from pursuing one's passion, the value that comes when you put aside money, at least temporarily, to focus on adding value and learning. And also a story of how when you get out of your comfort zone, when you talk to people, when you circulate ideas, great things come about. So we cover a lot of ground. We talk about minimum viable product. We talk about customer development. We talk about why you should never have an NDA, that's a non-disclosure agreement. We talk about leadership. It was just a really exhilarating conversation. And so I'm really honored to have had Christian on the show. I hope you enjoy learning about this new industry. Let us know what other types of interviews would help you. But I want to say thank you again to our sponsor for this episode. So this episode is sponsored by the Carlson School of Management. Whether you're transitioning to a civilian career or continuing military service, an MBA from Carlson at the University of Minnesota prepares you for a high-impact career in business. Carlson is committed to the veteran community and provides the benefits, experiential learning, and network to accelerate your career. In addition to a resident tuition waiver, all admitted full-time MBA military candidates receive generous scholarships and stipends to cover expenses that may not be eligible for the GI Bill. You can find more information by emailing mba@umn.edu. That is Mike Bravo Alpha at uniform Mike November Echo Delta Uniform. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Christian.
Dive.
Well, joining me today, usually in San Francisco, but today in San Diego, my guest is Christian Sanz. Christian, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
So for listeners, I want to give, first I'll give a bio on Christian and then some context about how we had this conversation. So Christian is the CEO and founder of SkyCatch, the leading industrial aerial data collection and analytics company focused on indexing and extracting critical information from the physical world. He served in the Navy for 4 years, and his civilian career includes work as a software engineer at the Walt Disney Company, a senior software engineer at LoopNet, the senior director of engineering at Break Media, the CTO of at Kin Community, the founding CTO of Storify that was acquired by Adobe, and the founder of DroneGames. Over the last 7 years, Christian has grown SkyCatch to have over 50 employees and $46 million in funding. And one other thing that I'll add is that the reason I'm talking to Christian is we got sponsored by the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management to do some new interviews. I realized we'd never talked to someone in I'll just call it the drone industry. And so I was doing some research of veterans who've made a dent in that space and came across Christian, and cold reached out to him. He was gracious enough to set aside some time for us. So yeah, Christian, I'm appreciating your time and want to start by making space. Anything to add or amend to that bio from the start?
No, I think you nailed it.
Thank
That's
you.
perfect.
All right, good. Well, let's, I want to spend the bulk of the time talking about SkyCatch, but let's start maybe with your own transition from the Navy back in 1998. Could you just share a little bit more about what that was like for you and how you started your civilian career?
Yeah, I think we were talking briefly about this earlier, and I think back then the tools, there weren't many tools available for you to go out and say, okay, here's the direction you need to go. And there's so many options out there too, and it wasn't really clear to me that what was I good for after the military, and where do I fit? So that was quite a transition. I enrolled at UCLA, then I dropped out, and then I just started getting really deep into the internet boom and just using the internet in general. And I started getting into technology, started getting into building websites and databases and CGI, Perl, and all those things. I was just reading books at the library or wherever I could see them or find them. And I started doing free work for people, actually, just to get involved in the technology industry. So I started building. I remember building a database for lawyers for a law firm, and it was all free. I did it for free just so that I could learn. And not only did I learn a lot about the legal lawsuits that that they were managing, but I also learned a lot about databases and deploying and managing websites and things like that. And then eventually I got an email because I started publishing things into what was called SourceForge, which is the old GitHub. And I started contributing and posting some scripts. And I got a call from Belkin Components. Belkin Components, they make the mouse, the USB ports. And they asked me, hey, you guys, are you interested in doing some database work? And I was fascinated because it was incredible because at that time, a lot of the roles for the internet weren't formalized. So it was just a webmaster. Back then they were just looking for webmasters, and you're supposed to know everything. And so I went in and started doing some very basic stuff for the company. They were moving all of their offline sales into online. They were building their first e-commerce, and I helped build that. And I got really close to the guy who's building the database. Learned a ton, and then through that process, I was still publishing more scripts into SourceForge, and then someone in there working at InfoSeek, a search engine, reached out and said, "Hey, can we talk to you? We're interested in your Perl skills," and that's when I interviewed with InfoSeek, and InfoSeek obviously got bought out by Disney, and that's how I ended up at Disney. So that was my transition from not knowing I was going to end up in the military. But just going out there and exploring things.
That's wild. I love one of the things I love about that is I first love how you kind of taught yourself and you just kind of threw yourself into it. And I love this thought of you working for free, which a lot of people are not willing to do, but it seems like I'm guessing that was a way for you to sharpen your skills in the real world while realizing you might not have been at a point to charge for it, but that willingness to, that strikes me as a willingness to invest in yourself and
Yeah.
invest in a skill set and almost taking like the long view rather than the view, the sense I get so often from veterans is like, I want to make bank right away. I want to have this title right away. And I love that measured sense of like, this is something I want to get better at. And one question I had on that is, at the time, like this is this new field, there's like a lot going on there. Did that feel like a big risk, like throwing your career into this emerging thing? Or was it like, were you like a surfer on the shore seeing a wave about to crash and you're like, this is going to be massive. Let me do whatever I can do to get in.
I've always been fascinated with building things, and since I was a kid, I was building stuff, and so it just I saw this as an opportunity for me to have ability to build something, at some point. And so, in order for me to build something, I wanted to learn how to build it first, and so that was the motivation for me. It's like let's get down to the engine, and learn about like how does the engine work, so that I can build it myself at some point. And so that was the intention. It wasn't so much here are the things that I need to study now in order for me to get to I basically just wanted to build and create at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the motivation. And so I had to learn how to code, but it was all driven by very different than a coder. Coder learns how to code because they love the language. They love the different ways they can trim down the code and the algorithm and things like that. I wanted to see something work and being used by someone. And that
Yeah.
was really truly at the core, and that really drove me to spend weekends rather than going out and reading books and getting better and better and staying late nights trying to figure out a bug or trying to fix something. It really drove me to that, having that goal that at some point I want to build something myself. It really drove me through that process.
I love, I mean, that resonates with me. I'm very similar, but I think that what you're highlighting, and I don't think this gets enough airtime, is the artistic aspect of entrepreneurship and the like in my view, I think what energizes me about entrepreneurship is the raw creative potential to, see a problem and solve it or build something new and see people using it. And I feel like all of the attention gets kind of on the money making aspect of it or empire building aspect. But I love that it seems like you're driven by this desire to create or bring new, birth new things into the world.
I think you're absolutely right on that. Many people go into the career thinking more about like, what am I going to get out of this, and where you're basically saying, who am I going to impact with what I'm creating? And typically, if you take that approach, you have a much bigger chance to sort of impact yourself as well.
Was it going from like starting, on your own and then be part of Belkin and then part of Disney? Was it like, what was it like going from like what I'm imagining was a very small, quick-paced environment to then part of just one of the bigger companies on the planet? And I'm curious how that played into your decision when you left Disney, if it was kind of like you were itching for something smaller or something more entrepreneurial.
So I was definitely, I mean, as a military person, I was terrified to starting my own company. I was always, as a military person, you're used to getting your steady paycheck, a place to live, food, all these things that you take for granted sometimes, but you get so used to it. It kind of puts you into a box. And so for me, the transition into Belkin and then Disney was kind of a normal transition because these are big companies, they're very standard. But what wasn't very comfortable was the fact that we were going through this crazy period of time where the internet was booming and all of a sudden it collapsed, right? And so things that I did during that period of time saved my job at Disney, for instance. I was focusing on a different part of the business, where at nighttime I would be, or when I had free time, I was contributing to another group that was working on subscriptions and building games. And because I was like, man, that's cool. And so I was basically landing my time while I wasn't working on the other side of the business. And then when they went through this huge reduction, all companies went through these huge reductions. Go.com got sold and shut down, and many businesses got shut down. We went through a massive layoff. A lot of employees got laid off. And the people who I was contributing with on the gaming side, Toontown, they actually elevated my name and said, hey, we really need him because he's been helping us out. Can we save him? And so that's how I stayed at Disney for a lot longer than a year, because otherwise I would have been on the layoff list. So
I loved there's so many things already in your story where it's like you doing something to help or doing something to like enrich yourself, and that leads to something better. That's really, I enjoy that more than the stories of like someone who like has this blueprint of like, I'm going to go do this, like it seems like in your story, it's things are working out favorably, but it's because it's coming from this place of generosity and doing things that interest you.
It's yeah, exactly. So it's less of a plan. It's more me putting myself in front of the things that I want to do, and sort of breaking off that wall and interacting with people who are in turn are pulling me in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears just a little bit. Let's fast forward to where you are now. And if you were to like maybe bump into someone who's in the Navy on the street in San Diego and they're like, Christian, what on earth is SkyCatch? I kind of gave the quick description at the start, but like, how do you explain what your company does?
That's interesting. I've run into quite a few military members. Actually, some of them do Uber, so you get on it and you can tell they're military just the way they talk.
Yeah.
And I love running into them, and I don't try to tell them what I do. I ask them what they're doing, and because I don't want to throw what I'm doing to them, and but I try to listen, and then sometimes I keep in touch. Hey, let me know if you ever want to do something or start a company. Let me know. But I never tell them that I have a company or that I raised that much money. I just kind of play it off, and then from once in a while I get an email back say, hey, I just looked you up. What?
That's awesome.
Before we were just chatting. It's like and he sometimes they give me advice. They're like what I read, you should do this, you should do that. So wow, that's actually a good tip. Let me.
That's awesome.
But anyways, I try to play it down so we're in the same field, same level, so they can open up. But my advice to them when they open up is pursue what you love, pursue what you're really passionate about, and don't if that's what you're doing, that will drive you to work longer hours, work over the weekend because you love it, right? Talk to people who are experts in it. But when you're driving for a title, when you're driving for that role or that salary, you're always going to limit yourself on how much you're going to do, how far you're going to go. When you're in survival mode, same thing. You're willing to make those phone calls that you typically wouldn't want to make, right? You're willing to talk to people that typically you wouldn't want to call them and talk to them. So when you love something so much, you're willing to go the extra mile. And going the extra mile means talking to people at nighttime, supporting them at nighttime or weekends, because you love it and it makes you feel happy. And when you do that, then everything else comes your way. So that's been the sort of the feedback. But I'm very careful not to give feedback until I have established some sort of trust,
Yeah. Well, I also like that willingness to learn from anyone too. And I like that sense.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. If also if that passion and love is driving you, I do think that people will hang in there longer or do things that they wouldn't if they're just white knuckling through it, or it's something they don't like.
So let me tell you that you just posted earlier that I didn't get a chance to answer anyways.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was basically, how would you explain what you do at SkyCatch today? And the vision has always started from, and I'll tell you a little bit more on how we started SkyCatch and how it got started. But the vision was, how do we make the physical world is changing all the time, especially in areas of industrial use like construction and mining. It's changing all the time, and people want to know what changed. People want to know which area of that physical structure moved. And today is extremely difficult to get really accurate information about the physical world in 3D. So my passion around drones and the ability I've always been in 3D since Disney when we were doing Toontown, is how do we create very precise information, 3D information of the physical world so that it can be consumed by humans or machines or robots, right? And so that was at the core. And so back in 2013, we started off with very basic functionality to deliver that information to users. It would take us about 2-3 weeks to process and generate a high precision point cloud. 2015, we rolled out with Komatsu and automated machines for their Japanese smart construction. And then today we basically have what we wanted to achieve back in 2013 is really fast, accurate 3D data for industrial use. That's basically a long-winded version of the.
So is that like, let's say like oil refinery? Is it having drones go through and map it out so they understand exactly the lay of the land and the infrastructure in place?
Right. So if you think of you, for instance, you consume data in 3D. Your eyes, you look around, everything is 3D. We're basically creating the same thing of the physical world. So we're basically taking a photocopy of the world. The drone just happens to be a tool for us, but we also take data from laser scans, take data from RTK networks, and then we give you a 3D. Now 3D can be generated very easily. There's lots of software off the shelf, open source, that you can actually use to generate 3D. But 3D from normal 3D, when you point to an object inside the 3D object, it doesn't necessarily tell you whether it's accurate or not. Typically, it's about 5 meters off, right? In our 3D, every object, if you have a cup of coffee at the bottom of the open pit mine, it'll be accurate to sub 5 centimeters.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So that is the tech.
I mean, 5 meters plus or minus 5 meters is massive, right? I mean, if you're
centimeters.
No, but I mean before, right? You were saying, I think you were saying before your technology, it was like a massive field of like, you're not going to know whether there's a wall there or whether there's an object. So the level of precision that you're bringing to a company, what are examples of things they would do with that? Are they like, once they have that information, how do they use it?
So there's a variety of different things. So in construction, they want to know that that the earth that they're molding before they're putting the infrastructure on top is actually the right leveled, it's right angle, and before they start putting concrete on top, right? So that is really important, and it's called the earthworks phase of construction. You need to have high precision understanding of the ground before you start putting everything on top. That's one of them. The other one is automating machines. So if in the case of Komatsu, one of our biggest customers, they used the point cloud. They came to us in 2014. They said, we need point clouds because very accurate point clouds deliver very fast.
And a point cloud is just like a three-dimensional model of something?
Yeah, it's a three-dimensional model with thousands of points.
Okay.
Which has a reference to Latin long, a location space.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they said we need that in order to automate the machines. And we asked them, why do you want to automate the machines? Well, because we're going through this massive labor shortage, and people don't want to drive bulldozers or excavators anymore. And so we're losing business. And so we want to make it very easy to drive so we can hire more people who are not skilled at driving bulldozers. So I can hire a high school student and they can drive a bulldozer. And so the challenge we had back then in 2014 is that it took about 2 weeks to actually generate the data, and they told us we need 30 minutes. It needs to be done in 30 minutes. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And so now today we can deliver that in 30 minutes. That's one use case. We deployed in 10,000 sites in Japan. And now they're going global. They're going into Australia, Africa, and everywhere. And they're deploying these machines that are consuming our data, and they're automated.
And just to make sure I'm tracking, so when you're saying like the equivalent of hiring a high school student to run a bulldozer, that's because the equipment has information that it's almost like bumper bowling. It's going to keep them out of the gutter. It's going to allow relatively unskilled labor to operate extremely complex machinery, because the machinery has the data that knows like, hey, don't go over there. There's a wall or whatever else. Is that a layman's interpretation?
Yeah, that is that's perfect. And I can add a little bit to it where, let's say, for instance, you're a bulldozer driver. You've been driving for a long time. And basically what you're doing is they give you a job for the day, and you have to carve out this much material from the ground. And we're going to put sticks, and then you're going to use your gut instinct and your experience to move the front of the shovel in the right direction so that it actually matches the stick, right? And that is extremely hard to do it just simply by knowing the machines. There's so many different things you got to move. But when you drive it for such a long time, when you've been driving it for 5 years, you get really good at it. But it's just impossible to train someone on how to do that in a couple of weeks. So instead of doing that, the machine actually is moving the controls.
Wow.
But because it has the point cloud fed into the machine, into the brain of the machine. Yeah.
And when so when you say like within 30 minutes, I picture you with a big red button that you push, and these drones fly up out of the walls and fly off and take it. Like how are you able to get such incredibly precise detail in such a short amount of time?
There's so much complexity that we're automating in that process. So first of all, we automate the process of collecting the data. That's number one. So the drone takes off, and it has an array of lat and longs, waypoints, and it follows them. And then as soon as it follows them, it takes a photo, and it also talks to an RTK network, so that we know exactly where the camera was in space when the photo was taken. And then we log that data, and then we have a base station that's doing the same thing. It's basically every time you're taking a photo, it's also pinging the RTK network. And then we combine the base station data and the drone data, and we put it into our photogrammetry software. And our photogrammetry software is basically looking for features. It's doing feature extraction. So for instance, with us, it'll find the eyes, the face, the nose, right? And then it'll take multiple photos, overlap to each other, and it'll match it, the eye with the other eye, the nose with the other nose. And then we will do densification, which is basically drawing a line between everything that's been matched.
Yep.
And that's really the core of generating 3D.
Wow.
And then after that, we grab all the RTK data, and we say, okay, so GPS gave us a location, but it's wrong. It's either 4 or 5 meters off if it's based on GPS. So now we're going to reproject every single point to the actual location. And that process is where the stuff that we patented and we've developed over the last 3 years to make it almost perfect. So then we have thousands of points inside this 3D model that are sub 5 centimeter accurate to the actual location of that point. And so that's the process. Now there's a lot more to it. I mean, we do things like remove objects from the ground. So if you have a tree, if you have a truck, we remove those from the ground as well, because otherwise you can't really work with that.
And I think one thing I just want to pinpoint for listeners is like, I think this is an interesting conversation, because I know very little about this industry broadly, right? Like the way that we started was I was like, well, let's talk about someone who's doing something in the drone industry. And what I hope listeners are appreciating from this is like, as we zoom in, you realize that within any extremely broad industry, there are so many thousands of what seem like very micro use cases. Like I would have never even thought that this would be something that companies value, or I would never even thought it existed, right? But it's like,
yep.
you're illustrating that within any industry, there's so many pain points to solve and so many opportunities. And I would love to maybe rewind a little bit to kind of back into how you came to this. And one thing I'm curious about was if this was an idea you were working on that then the emergence of drones becomes like one way to make it even better? Or was it that you saw like the emergence of drones and you're like, oh, this is going to make this possible? Like, so could you share a little bit more about the origin story?
Absolutely. So I've always been, again, I've always been fascinated with flying things. I used to have my own. I used to build my own airplanes, and I used to fly them. I used to be a hobbyist before, and so when drones came out, and the level of stability that you actually get from a drone, and I don't know how much you know about drones, and the what gave birth to drones, but is all these sensors that were before were extremely expensive, like accelerometers, gyros. These things were like $1,000, $2,000, and they're super big. And during the smartphone revolution, when iPhone came around, Apple, commoditized all these sensors. They brought them down to cents, and that's how developers started to hack together these drones that were using these smart sensors inside the iPhone, and using that in writing software to say, okay, so if I'm tilting this way, I'm going to spin that motor a little bit more. If I'm tilting this way, if I'm moving this way, I'm actually going to. So all of that was built. That was at the core of the drone industry. So that had already been developed, and quite a lot when I started getting into it, mostly in the open source community. And in 2012, I was invited to hack on drones back in Ireland. I was doing a talk in Node.js, and a buddy of mine said, hey, we're going to go out for beers, and after that, we're going to go see this hackathon they're hacking on drones. And I was like, absolutely, man. Bring, what are you talking about? So I went to this hackathon. It was called Nodecopter, and I was hooked in. It was this underground hackathon that was going on, and they were basically writing JavaScript software, deploying it into the drone, and the drone would take off and do things like, detect a hand if it's moving, follow it, plug it into the. One guy built this thing where it plugs it into the PlayStation API, so you can wave your hands like this and it would take off. It was really cool that we just making this thing fly and move around. It's really awesome. And I had a camera that was plugged into, that was streaming and piping data into OpenCV, so you can write some really cool computer vision stuff. So anyways, I did this for a few months, and then I took the hackathon to San Francisco. So when I flew back, I started doing these hackathons in San Francisco, and then I did a competition called DroneGames.co. And so the hackathons were like really underground, only developers allowed. Don't bring any external people or journalists, nobody. We don't want the attention. And but then I created Drone Games, and we got a ton of attention. Now, it wasn't without the community being a little bit upset at me for making it mainstream. But then at the same time, I was able to bring money to pay for the drones so that we can do more events, right? And so that took off. We got developers from Twitter, developers from Stanford competing with each other, and it got really big. And so I got really deep into it, mainly because I was also building software for it. I was building simulators so that you didn't have to, fly the drone to test your software. So I was building a 3D simulator. And but after this got really big, and we were at South by Southwest, invited there, Maker Faire, I started getting a little bit stressed because this became more of an event than what I really wanted to do, which is to actually hack and build cool stuff and compete myself, right? And so my attraction to the whole thing started going down, and I said, look, the whole idea of building drone games was to get to a point where you can see something. Okay, here's the true solution that that's going to work for this industry. I couldn't find it through drone games, but I got close enough to understand the possibilities to get my mind thinking about, okay, what could you potentially do with this camera that's flying in an automated fashion and can collect data? So I talked to many friends, and this was not just me, going to sleep and coming up with an idea as I wake up. It's just lots of conversations and asking friends who are in the industry, VCs, and say, look, here's the problem that I want to solve. Something that either industrial space or it could be Could be security. That's what I was focusing on first. It could be security. Where is this information extremely valuable if it changes, and where the drone can actually be looking at it and give that information back to you. So I looked at security, and that didn't really appeal to me in terms of what people were willing to pay for, and the industry just wasn't ready for that. And then I kept asking, so what industries change all the time, and those changes people care about, and they're big numbers behind those changes. And construction and mining kept coming up every single time. Construction. So then I just went to a construction site, a couple of sites, and went in. The first one that I went into, I got kicked out because I went in with a t-shirt and flip-flops, and they're like, "What the hell are you doing here?" and so then I came back with I remember I flew DPR or Skanska from far away. I had placed a camera on the drone, and I had these goggles where I can see everything. And I would go into the site from far away and fly it. But I remember they came back to me. They're like, "Hey, we told you not to come back here. What are you doing?" And so the superintendent at that time, he's like, "Hey, let me see that. Can I see the photos and videos that are inside there?" And I thought they were just going to ask me to remove it, go away. This happened in early 2013 or late 2012. And they're like, "Hey, can you actually take another video, but from this angle?" And I'm like, "What?" This is great. So what do you need it for? So, well, I want to show the owner because we're doing the panels, and I want to get the right angle. So why don't you take that with the phone? And so, well, we're not getting the right angle with that. And so, okay, so let me do that. So I did it, and he shared internally, and then like 3 other people came back to me. He's like, "Hey, can you do this again, but from this angle, because we're actually doing the concrete side." And then some other guy was asking me, "Can you come back tomorrow, because we're doing a cement delivery, and we want to take some photos from above to make sure that we have record of it." And so I was starting getting all these requests, and I was doing it all for free. And I did it for 2 weeks, basically going in and out. And I would stay really long hours until, really late at night, just processing the data to make sure that they actually had it in box and they can browse it and all of that. But I was at that point, I was sold. I was like, this is needed in the industry. I'm giving them more eyes that they don't have. I'm giving them ground truth that doesn't exist in their minds yet. Because every single minute that passes in construction, something changes. And every single time something changes, they care about it, but they're not getting that information, that data to them fast enough. So I was on a path. I don't know how I'm going to materialize a product for you, but I'm on a path to solve this for you. So then I went to the 49ers Stadium as a second site that I visited. It was the third site. At the time, I already had a hard hat, had vest, and so I wasn't really working for them, but I would just go in, do the flights, pass it on to the superintendent or the BIM manager or BDC, and they would assume that I was part of the project, and I wasn't. I was just testing to see if this is actually not just one site, but then I verified that this was something that was also needed on a second site. And so I was going to do this for like 6 months, across 10 to 20 sites to really validate that this is actually a true opportunity that I would invest in. I had already invested about a year into this. And I talked to a friend of mine who happens to be our lawyer now. And I said, "Look, I'm going to test this out. Look, here's all the data I've gathered." And I shared this with a few VCs, and they were all, are you kidding me? You're going to wait 6 months? You got to start now. And so I was really hesitant to start, because I knew that once you start, it's like a racetrack that never ends until you grow as big as a company, right? And so knowing I had already started companies in the past, I had gone through the VC route, I had done it all, and I felt like I was very hesitant to start the company until I knew for sure this was it. And but my friends encouraged me, and they're like, "This is it, man. You gotta push, you gotta do it." And so I did it. And one VC, I forwarded the emails from, I remember I needed to have some sort of pricing idea of what I was going to be doing. And when I was doing the 49ers Stadium, they emailed me back from the other projects, and some of them asked me, "Hey, can you tell me how much is this so that we can do it ourselves?" And I told him, I have no idea. I don't have a product. I don't have anything. It's just a bunch of scripts, and I have to be attached to it because otherwise, because I have to follow every single thing. And I can share that with you maybe, and then I can tell you, point it to the drone that you can buy, and I can train you maybe, but it's going to be expensive. So I was trying to bog them off because I didn't have anything. So they asked me, it's like, how much is this? I said, $20,000, and they're like, oh, that's cheap. And I'm like, what? I have no idea. I wasn't thinking about pricing or go to market. I was just trying to validate if this is actually going to be something I was going to do. And so I forwarded some of those threads to some of the VCs. Hey, I want to keep you up to date. I'm thinking of you if I ever start a company. Here's what I'm doing. That's really important to do, by the way. Just build a relationship and a lot of touch points with your VCs. And so that they see that you're constantly progressing into an idea, into execution. And so I did that, and I thought, okay, so they're going to get back to me. They're going to say, hey, get back to me in a few months. But the reaction was like, let me in. Let's start this thing. Many of them wanted to send me a check before I even started the company, and that wasn't the same experience in my previous company. For some reason, this in the process that I went through to validate the product and the reaction of people in the field made VCs move much faster towards this idea. So that's how it started.
I love it. I want to just kind of bookmark a couple of things for listeners. First of all, one of the things I love about that's an incredible story. One of the things I love about that is for listeners interested in entrepreneurship, this was not Christian in a silo working in a laboratory for a year, right? He started in this Fight Club-like setting for hackers and was constantly immersing himself and learning and running ideas by and faking a construction worker get up and like getting out there, taking an idea and getting out there. And I hope you tracked in that story how much the idea started to grow and take on its own life as he exposed it to fresh air. And I say that because so many people I talk with who are interested in entrepreneurship, they're like, this is an idea, but you have to sign an NDA for me to talk about. And like, if someone says that, I'm like, this is going to be a stupid idea. Like the more protective someone is, usually the stupider the idea is. But just like from Christian's idea, he's getting like all these fingerprints on it and it's growing and evolving. And so I think that that's incredible. A second thing I want to point out is the curiosity that Christian is showing. And as you were narrating that story of that first site, and you're like, you kind of get caught back on the property and they're like, hey, could you take this video? In my mind, I'm like, sure, I'll take that video for you. But as you're telling that story, you're like, well, why do you want to do it? Why can't you just take a phone? And it's like this inquisitive nature that helps you understand that the depth of the problem they're solving. And then the last piece, and this has been consistent throughout your story, is your willingness to do the thought for me of doing 2 weeks on a site, long hours, doing all of this. I go to this place of like, what's in it for me? Okay, what do you like? Starting to wheel and deal right away. And I just love that throughout your story, there's this sense of adventure where you're willing to deliver value because you're learning from it, you're growing, and it's not this fixation on like what's going in my pocket right now. And then lastly, I love this thought that the investors are pulling you into it. It's interesting because with the I'm just looking at my notes from your bio with DroneGames, it's like you were actually seeking the opposite of attention, and it attracts all of this attention and publicity. And same thing here, you're not seeking money, you're just keeping your network alive, you're keeping people informed, and that brings it. And so I think there's so much for listeners to glean from that story, but it's pretty exceptional. I know that we're a little bit limited on time, but I'm just kind of curious. In the 7 years that you've been running the company, I imagine there's been lots of ups and downs and learnings along the way, and this is by far not your first venture. But what are some things for listeners who are interested in entrepreneurship? What other advice do you have for them from your own long history in entrepreneurship about to bear in mind?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, so I came in, I was born in Jersey. I lived in Chile for about most of my early life. I moved here when I was 13. I was selling games and selling shoes when I was 12. So I've always been interested in putting myself out there, and it's more about me being independent and being able to do things on my own, and sort of figuring out how do I do things on my own. Maybe I need to sell things, maybe I need to build things, and so that seek of independence was always sort of ingrained in me, and I think that is in the hearts of veterans too. They want to when they leave the military, they want to seek that independence, and sort of I think just hold on to that, that desire to be independent and sort of to survive on your own and drive it through, and then choose the path of not, like you said a few times, not a what's going to give me more money, or what's the titles that I need to go after. Look, if you're chasing your passion and you're putting yourself in the right places, you're talking to the right people, you're putting the right amount of effort, the titles and the salaries will chase you, right? But if you're doing the opposite, it'll be, you'll always going to be chasing them, right? But if you're really focusing on what truly, your true passion, you're going to go the extra mile to make those phone calls to the VC. You're going to make that extra mile to approach someone in the middle of nowhere in the construction site and say, hey, can I ask you a question? If you're truly going after that passion and that love for what you want to build, you're going to go above and beyond. When you're doing it simply for a title or for money, you're always going to limit yourself. It's like running. I'm a runner, and your brain is constantly telling you slow down, slow down, slow down. If you're doing it to get healthy because you want to be a healthier person, you're going to push yourself through that brain telling you stop, stop, stop. If you're doing it for vanity because you want to finish first and you want to show people that you finished running, you're going to stop. It's not enough. So always dig deep into your passion and push for that, because that will drive you to do things beyond what you typically do in order for you to find and then achieve your dreams.
How about, and this is kind of thinking out loud on this, and this is my own fear coming up as I hear that is, either examples from your own life or advice around, part of my mind goes to like, well, what if I'm interested in puzzles and I pour all of myself into puzzles, and then no one gives a shit about puzzles, so that doesn't work out. Like, so I'm just
I see
wondering,
what you
like,
mean.
yeah,
I
is
see
there
what you mean.
any?
So, sort of the tactical steps, right? So
Yeah.
I think you should. So there's many books about MVP. You know about MVP, minimal viable product. Extremely important to starting a company. How do you focus on solving the thing that the user wants, the demands, right? Don't get deep into building something until you can confirm that someone's willing to pay for it, right? So, and it's not about money. It's about someone paying for something is a validation, is a point. It's saying, yes, I vote for you,
Yep.
right? So there's no better way to get validation than to get someone to tell you, yeah, I'm willing to pay for that. You don't have to charge them, but you can get that validation. And so I think going through that, so Steve Blank is one of the great authors of MVP, and customer development. And so I think that is like really important. Get familiarized with the whole concept of MVP. Then get familiarized with the whole concept of customer development. Customer development is exactly what I did on the job site, is going out there and talking to the actual customer and validating to see if they're actually going to be using your stuff, right? So many companies start with imagining this is going to be things that people will use, but they never test the customer. They never put it in front of people, and it's usually just in their imagination, right? Being able to put this in front of people is extremely important. And like you said earlier, if you're putting an NDA between you and the idea, you're never going to get the actual idea, right? So you may have a blurry idea of what you want to do, but you're basically, with an NDA, you're putting a roadblock. You're basically limiting yourself from being able to have access to information that's critical for you to continue to advance. And constantly testing, iterating, validating, and getting to a point like, okay, so I have enough data, enough information from different viewpoints, from different people, that this is actually something that people are willing to pay for, and it's making an impact for them. It's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. They actually need it right now. And the path to building that is the MVP, minimal viable product, building something very simple to prove a point, right? So don't build, I'm going to build the full, search engine. I'm going to build the full social network. You're going to spend all the money, and you're going to spend 3 years, launch, and realize, oh, it wasn't really necessarily what customers wanted, right? So getting bits and pieces out to customers so that they can consume it and give you feedback, and you can iterate and move faster and move on to the next thing. So finding also, as you go through this process, there's 3 things that I learned through, working with incredible fellow founders and CEOs and VCs. That are 3 things that I need to be really good at as a CEO and founder. Is make sure that we have a clear vision of where we're headed, make sure there's money in the bank, right? And so that has to do with sales, right? And that has to do with revenue and fundraising. The last one is making sure I'm the best recruiter in the company. Finding extremely talented people that are in the same mindset as you in terms of wanting to achieve, this goal that you want to achieve. There's a variety of different ways that you can recruit people and vet them, but it's not about their school. It's not about their amount of experience. It's about their drive. How are they smart? Can they learn fast? Are they into what you're doing? Are they just like dreaming about it? Yes, they are. Come over, join us. Because recruiting the wrong people and through that journey will make it heavier and make it slower for you to move faster. And that is really important. And it's not that some people may not be a good fit for you or they're not good enough. Is that building a startup is, you have to be a little bit crazy. It's not normal to build a startup. It's not normal to wake up and have uncertainty every single week or every single day. What's normal is to have certainty. That's why big companies are a great place to work, because you have certainty of what you're going to get paid. You can have vacation, 401k, but having uncertainty every single day and every week is not normal. And I don't wish that on anybody. But what gets you through that uncertainty is having a vision, knowing that you're going to be the person who is going to impact this industry, and we're going to be building this thing. That is what allows you to ignore everything else.
I love that. At the starting point, I love this sense that what helps you with your passion is like having an impact. And, like I use that example of the puzzle, that's like a pretty small impact. It's an impact on me. And what I took away from what you were saying is like you take the idea and you're battle testing it in the real world, and you're figuring out like, how can I make a bigger impact? I don't want to just solve one plant's problem. I want to solve a problem that many plants have or many facilities have. And so it's like, I love that it feels like the antidote on this is getting out of your head and getting out of your house and getting into the customers and real world and testing that out. And I love that piece. And then I love, even for listeners who are not interested in entrepreneurship, I love this sense that like the vision is what is the antidote to that uncertainty. And I imagine, especially listeners who are on active duty, there's so much uncertainty of leaving the military. And maybe you're going to go to a Fortune 100 company, a massive company. Nothing to knock that, but I love that sense of having a vision for what you want for your life, for your family's life, and letting that guide you through those troughs of uncertainty. Well, I know we've only got a few minutes left here. I always like to keep the last question open-ended, and that's, there's so much we could have talked about. We're only able to cover so much. What stands out to you as something that you want to share with listeners before we wrap up?
I think, the process of building a company can be so complex, and you can get thrown so many wrenches at you. And, one big thing that I've missed sharing earlier was, being self-aware, knowing that you're in a bus, you're not the king, right? You're all going in the same direction. You can be in any seat in the bus. You just happen to be driving it. Is knowing that you can be in any seat in the bus, right? But the important thing is that the destination is, it doesn't matter where you're sitting. What matters is where you're headed, right? So that will help you make assessments about whether you are the right person to be the CEO at that moment. And then that will help you have conversations with people you've promoted too soon and say, hey, just like me, I don't know if I'm going to be the right fit next year, but I need to tell you that you may not be the right fit right now for the role that you're in, right? So that that is extremely important. If you hold on to your title, your role too tightly, you're going to most likely be moved out. And so it's better for you to be honest about it. And I have these conversations with the board all the time. Am I doing a good job? Am I the right fit for now? I want you to know that I'm open. All I care about is the success of the company and the collective success of the team. And I'm okay with whatever seat I'm taking in the bus, right? And I tell that to the team as well, and to my executive team. That is so important.
So I've never heard that before, and I love both the humility. It makes me think of you in these Uber cars, like, just like enormous library of knowledge to share, but just kind of being approachable and accessible. But I think that self-awareness and humility and the willingness to not cling to a position is really exceptional. I imagine that sets such a powerful example for your team, that it's like, look, if you're genuinely willing to give up the CEO seat when it doesn't serve the company, I imagine that makes it easier for them to be like, you know what, this is not the right role for me, and this is not serving the company. So I love that leadership by example.
And it has already. And, yeah.
Awesome. Christian, thank you for your time. I'm so grateful we were able to connect. It was, I think for listeners, one last thing I'll say is that this conversation came about through cold outreach, and, I learned so much. I'm so energized from it. And I hope that
I learned too.
Yeah. I hope listeners take from that sense of like, reach out to people, have conversations like this, and you never know what you'll learn. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, Justin, can I say one thing? You're really good at taking a lot of information and sort of making it in digestible pieces. So thank you for doing that too. Through that process, I actually picked out on things that I didn't really pay too much attention on. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Surface.
Beyond the Uniform is written and produced by me, Justin Nassiri, with help from our Chief of Staff, Steve Bain, and our editor, Kathleen Dillon. We are an all-volunteer organization and would greatly appreciate your help in any of the following ways. First, spread the word. Beyond the Uniform has over 330 podcast episodes and 15 on-demand webinars, all offered for free. Help us spread the word on social media, at military bases, or whatever gets this resource in front of more men and women who need it. Positive reviews on iTunes go a long way towards this as well. Second, sponsorship. Beyond the Uniform relies on sponsorship to keep us going. There is so much more we'd like to do, but we don't have nearly the resources to do so. If you know of a company that would like to advertise in any way with Beyond the Uniform, please send them to beyondtheuniform.org. Third, donations. If you're in a financial position to donate, you can find more information on the support section of beyondtheuniform.org. At our website, beyondtheuniform.org, you'll also find 330 plus episodes categorized by industry, functional role, and more. You'll find a link for live events, typically 4 per month. You'll also find both free and for purchase books that take a deeper dive on topics related to career growth. Thank you for your support as we aim to help members of the military and their families thrive in their post-military career and life.